Hi everybody, welcome back. I'm Christina, the manager at the Pacific Beach Library. Thank you for joining me for the third to last day of our Read Aloud Together. Wait, is that right? Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? Yes, the third to last day of our Read Aloud Together of the Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Let's start out with some tea. Today I decided, because yesterday I really enjoyed the bourbon vanilla so much, I made another pot of, hello Helen! I made another pot of bourbon vanilla tea a couple hours ago, and I thought we'd just pour it over ice and have it nice and chilly today and see how that was. Let's see. Yummy, yummy. That's really good. Alright, so also I wanted to ask you too, I was just before this was starting, I was creating an online event for Friday's tea party together, and I wanted to just check to make sure that that went through. It was a little tricky, but just, I don't know, because of the aspect of it being a group, or yeah, a group from a page for the business and not for me personally, I don't know. It wasn't letting me make it as an online event, so I just created it as an event, and I listed the website for Zoom, and also the information. So basically, if you want to go to our Zoom party on Friday, if it didn't show up, somebody please just mention to me that you did not see it on our page, and I'll actually go ahead and invite all the members of our group. I was hoping, I didn't want to spam anybody by inviting and also just posting it to our group in the thought that people might get it twice. And so if you don't see it on the page, just let me know, and then I will send out the invitation to everybody. Otherwise, the way to go in will just be to go to our Zoom meeting on Friday, and you will need a passcode. And so just go ahead and message my either myself or the PB page or just the tea group in general sometime before Friday at 3 o'clock, so we can send you the passcode to get into that meeting. All right, so that's all I got for housekeeping right now. Oh, yay! Judy says she did see it. She signed up already. I am so excited to finally get to hear your voice. This is so cool that we're going to get to do this together on Friday. So thank you very much for everybody who can join us. I'm really excited to get to enjoy tea and talk with you. Yeah, okay, sorry. Try to bring down that super excited face, but I'm really excited about it. It's just so great. Okay, so let's talk a little bit quickly about what happened yesterday, because we have 3 chapters today. This is our longest day of reading ever in our tea group. I'm sure many of you have stayed up a full night before to keep reading. Just one more chapter, one more chapter, one more chapter. So let's see. Yesterday we read 3 chapters. Chapter 107 was entitled The Lion's Den. And in that one, Andrea Cavalcanti, whom we also know as Benedetto, was in a prison known as the Lion's Den. He keeps waiting for a visit from somebody highborn. Specifically, he thinks that the Count of Monte Cristo, whom he believes to be his father, will come to visit him and rescue him yet again. However, instead of, when he's told that he does have a visitor, he goes in expecting to see the Count of Monte Cristo, but instead he sees Bertuccio, his adoptive father. And basically, Bertuccio agrees that he will finally tell Benedetto the name of his biological father. But just before they can reach that part of the conversation, they're interrupted and told that Andrea Cavalcanti must speak with the Procureur du Roi, the king's attorney, Monsieur de Villefort, and so Benedetto cannot reveal the name of, Bertuccio cannot reveal the name of Benedetto's father. We know it's Monsieur de Villefort. To Benedetto, because he has to speak to Monsieur de Villefort. So, drama on drama on drama on drama. However, Bertuccio tells Benedetto that he will come back the following day to tell him the truth about his father. And that's where the chapter ends. The next chapter, 108, is entitled The Judge. And in that one, Villefort is going through his grieving about, the death of his daughter Valentine, and the knowledge that it is his wife who has been the murderer all this time, the poisoner. Or the knowledge, yeah, he knows. And so the knowledge that it is his wife who is the murderer. And so to distract himself from that, he's been devoting himself rather single-mindedly to, the prosecution of this case against Andrea Cavalcanti. Finally, the morning has come of the assizes, which is the word for the trial session, And so just before he's about to go to the first day of the assizes, the trial session, his wife says, he gets a message from his wife through a servant saying, oh, she's dressed up, she's ready to go, do you want her to come in and sit on the court case today? And he says, you know what, I'm going to go up and talk to her. And so he goes up to speak to her, and he shuts the door behind them. And he sends out their child, and he locks the door behind them, and he tells her, where do you keep that poison that you usually use? And she's stunned. And basically he reveals to her that he knows, he is absolutely certain that she has poisoned and killed 4 members of their household, including, most recently, his daughter Valentine. and that even though, as a judge, he knows that she should be hung or, killed on the scaffold, instead, he is willing, because she is a member of his family, to allow her to take care of it herself. And by that, he just keeps saying, where do you keep the poison? Did you save a little for yourself? And so she begs him repeatedly, can you not forgive me? Can you not excuse me? I mean, this is, and he says, no, your options are basically the scaffold or to kill yourself before I come home today at the end of work. So he then leaves. He goes to work, which is the trial, also known as the Assizes. And what we get is just a prelude to what's going to happen in today's readings. And in chapter 109, it starts out at the Assizes, and there's many, many Parisians of all levels of society there to watch this scandalous case of Andrea Cavalcanti / Benedetto, who is both an Italian prince and a galley slave and a murderer and who knows what else. Like, it's just so weird and so scandalous. And so all these people are talking about it, including Beauchamp, Debray, and Chateau Renaud. And they go from speaking about Andrea's guilt to talking about Monsieur de Villefort, who is the prosecutor in this case. And they're saying, well, haven't seen him around so much. Well, it makes sense. He's got crazy stuff going on at his house. Multitudinous numbers of people are dying. And in fact, Beauchamp shares his theory, his speculation that it was actually, that there is a murderer living in the Villefort house. And that murderer is Edward de Villefort, the child, because they all know that his mother, his good mother, she has like apothecary kind of tendencies, and she creates medicines and things to help other people, and that perhaps the child took something out of that and was either intentionally or accidentally using it to hurt people. And again, the child not being able to be of perhaps sufficiently able to make the right decisions. So that's where they leave off, and the rest of them are like, yeah, sure, no, it's not the child. Or who knows who it could be, though. The chapter ends with court being called into session. And today we're going to read 3 chapters, and yeah, they're amazing. I peeked through yesterday. So let's go ahead and read chapters 110 to 112. Chapter 110 is entitled The Indictment. The judges took their places in the midst of the most profound silence. The jury took their seats. Monsieur de Villefort, the object of unusual attention, and we had almost said of general admiration, sat in the armchair and cast a tranquil glance around him. Everyone looked with astonishment on that grave and severe face, whose calm expression personal griefs had been unable to disturb. And the aspect of a man who was a stranger to all human emotions excited something very like terror. "Gendarmes," said the president, "lead in the accused." At these words, the public attention became more intense, and all eyes were turned towards the door through which Benedetto was to enter. The door soon opened, and the accused appeared. The same impression was experienced by all present, and no one was deceived by the expression of his countenance. His features bore no sign of that deep emotion which stops the beating of the heart and blanches the cheek. His hands, gracefully placed, one upon his hat, the other in the opening of his white waistcoat, were not at all tremulous. His eye was calm and even brilliant. Scarcely had he entered the hall when he glanced at the whole body of magistrates and assistants. His eye rested longer on the president, and still more so on the king's attorney. By the side of Andrea was stationed the lawyer who was to conduct his defense, and who had been appointed by the court, for Andrea disdained to pay any attention to those details to which he appeared to attach no importance. The lawyer was a young man with light hair, whose face expressed 100 times more emotion than that which characterized the prisoner. The president called for the indictment, revised, as we know, by the clever and implacable pen of Villefort. During the reading of this, which was long, the public attention was continually drawn towards Andrea, who bore the inspection with Spartan unconcern. Villefort had never been so concise and eloquent. The crime was depicted in the most vivid colors. The former life of the prisoner, his transformation, a review of his life from the earliest period, were set forth with all the talent that a knowledge of human life could furnish to a mind like that of the procurer. Benedetto was thus forever condemned in public opinion before the sentence of the law could be pronounced. Andrea paid no attention to the successive charges which were brought against him. Monsieur de Villefort, who examined him attentively, and who no doubt practiced upon him all the psychological studies he was accustomed to use, in vain endeavored to make him lower his eyes, notwithstanding the depth and profundity of his gaze. At length, the reading of the indictment was ended. "Accused," said the president, "your name and surname?" Andrea arose. "Excuse me, Mr. President," he said in a clear voice, "but I see you are going to adopt a course of questions through which I cannot follow you. I have an idea, which I will explain by and by, of making an exception to the usual form of accusation. Allow me then, if you please, to answer in a different order, or I will not do so at all." The astonished president looked at the jury, who in turn looked at Villefort. The whole assembly manifested great surprise, but Andrea appeared quite unmoved. "Your age," said the president. "Will you answer that question?" "I will answer that question. As for the rest, Mr. President, but in its turn." "Your age," repeated the president. "I am 21 years old, or rather I shall be in a few days, as I was born the night of the 27th of September, 1817. Monsieur de Villefort, who was busy taking down some notes, raised his head at the mention of this date. "Where were you born?" continued the president. "At Auteuil, near Paris." Monsieur de Villefort a second time raised his head, looked at Benedetto as if he had been gazing at the head of Medusa, and became livid. As for Benedetto, he gracefully wiped his lips with a fine cambric pocket-handkerchief. "Your profession?" "First I was a forager," answered Andrea as calmly as possible. "Then I became a thief, and lately have become an assassin." A murmur, or rather storm, of indignation burst from all parts of the assembly. The judges themselves appeared to be stupefied, and the jury manifested tokens of disgust for a cynicism so unexpected in a man of fashion. Monsieur de Villefort pressed his hand upon his brow, which, at first pale, had become red and burning. Then he suddenly arose and looked around as though he had lost his senses. He wanted air. "Are you looking for anything, Mr. Procureur?" asked Benedetto, with his most ingratiating smile. Monsieur de Villefort answered nothing, but sat, or rather threw himself down again upon his chair. "And now, prisoner, will you consent to tell your name?" said the president. "The brutal affectation with which you have enumerated and classified your crimes calls for a severe reprimand on the part of the court, both in the name of morality and for the respect due to humanity. You appear to consider this a point of honor, and it may be for this reason that you have delayed acknowledging your name. You wished it to be preceded by all these titles." "It is quite wonderful, Mr. President, how entirely you have read my thoughts," said Benedetto, in his softest voice and most polite manner. "This is, indeed, the reason why I begged you to alter the order of the questions." The public astonishment had reached its height. There was no longer any deceit or bravado in the manner of the accused. The audience felt that a startling revelation was to follow this ominous prelude. "Well," said the president, "your name." "I cannot tell you my name, since I do not know it, but I know my father's, and can tell it to you." A painful giddiness overwhelmed Villefort. Great drops of acrid sweat fell from his face upon the papers which he held in his convulsed hand. "Repeat your father's name," said the president. Not a whisper, not a breath was heard in the vast assembly. Everyone waited anxiously. "My father is King's attorney," replied Andrea calmly. "King's attorney?" said the president, stupefied, and without noticing the agitation which spread over the face of Monsieur de Villefort. "King's attorney?" "Yes, and if you wish to know his name, I will tell it. He is named Villefort." The explosion, which had been so long restrained from a feeling of respect to the court of justice, now burst forth like thunder from the breasts of all present. The court itself did not seek to restrain the feelings of the audience. the exclamations, the insults addressed to Benedetto, who remained perfectly unconcerned, the energetic gestures, the movement of the gendarmes, the sneers of the scum of the crowd, always sure to rise to the surface in case of any disturbance. All this lasted 5 minutes before the doorkeepers and magistrates were able to restore silence. In the midst of this tumult, the voice of the president was heard to exclaim, "Are you playing with justice, accused? And do you dare set your fellow citizens an example of disorder which even in these times has never been equaled?" Several persons hurried up to Monsieur de Villefort, who sat half bowed over in his chair, offering him consolation, encouragement, and protestations of zeal and sympathy. Order was re-established in the hall, except that a few people still moved about and whispered to one another. A lady, it was said, had just fainted. They had supplied her with a smelling bottle, and she had recovered. During the scene of tumult, Andrea had turned his smiling face towards the assembly. Then, leaning with one hand on the oaken rail of the dock, in the most graceful attitude possible, he said, "Gentlemen, I assure you I had no idea of insulting the court, or of making a useless disturbance in the presence of this honorable assembly. They ask my age, I tell it. They ask where I was born, I answer. They ask my name. I cannot give it, since my parents abandoned me. But though I cannot give my own name, not possessing one, I can tell them my father's. Now I repeat, my father is named Monsieur de Villefort, and I am ready to prove it." There was an energy, a conviction, and a sincerity in the manner of the young man which silenced the tumult. All eyes were turned for a moment towards the procureur, who sat as motionless as though a thunderbolt had changed him into a corpse. "Gentlemen," said Andrea, commanding silence by his voice and manner, "I owe you the proofs and explanations of what I have said." "But," said the irritated president, "you called yourself Benedetto, declared yourself an orphan, and claimed Corsica as your country." "I said anything I pleased, in order that the solemn declaration I have just made should not be withheld, which otherwise would certainly have been the case. I now repeat that I was born at Auteuil on the night of the 27th of September, 1817, and that I am the son of the procureur, Monsieur de Villefort. Do you wish for any further details? I will give them. I was born in number 28, Rue de la Fontaine, in a room hung with red damask. My father took me in his arms, telling my mother I was dead, wrapped me in a napkin marked with an H and an N, and carried me into a garden where he buried me alive. A shudder ran through the assembly when they saw that the confidence of the prisoner increased in proportion to the terror of Monsieur de Villefort. "But how have you become acquainted with all these details?" asked the president. "I will tell you, Mr. President. A man who had sworn vengeance against my father and had long watched his opportunity to kill him had introduced himself that night into the garden in which my father buried me. He was concealed in a thicket. He saw my father bury something in the ground and stabbed him. Then, thinking the deposit might contain some treasure, he turned up the ground and found me still living. The man carried me to the Foundling Asylum, where I was registered under the number 37. 3 months afterwards, a woman traveled from Rogliano to Paris to fetch me, and having claimed me as her son, carried me away. Thus, you see, though born in Paris, I was brought up in Corsica." There was a moment's silence, during which one could have fancied the hall empty, so profound was the stillness. "Proceed," said the president. "Certainly. I might have lived happily amongst those good people who adored me, but my perverse disposition prevailed over the virtues which my adopted mother endeavored to instill into my heart. I increased in wickedness till I committed crime. One day, when I cursed Providence for making me so wicked and ordaining me to such a fate, my adopted father said to me, 'Do not blaspheme, unhappy child. The crime is that of your father, not yours. Of your father, who consigned you to hell if you died, and to misery if a miracle preserved you alive.' After that I ceased to blaspheme, but I cursed my father. That is why I have uttered the words for which you blame me. That is why I have filled this whole assembly with horror. If I have committed an additional crime, punish me. But if you will allow that ever since the day of my birth my fate has been sad, bitter, and lamentable, then pity me." "But your mother?" asked the president. "My mother thought me dead. She is not guilty. I did not even wish to know her name, nor do I know it." Just then a piercing cry, ending in a sob, burst from the center of the crowd, who encircled the lady who had before fainted, and who now fell into a violent fit of hysterics. She was carried out of the hall, the thick veil which concealed her face dropped off, and Madame Danglars was recognized. Notwithstanding his shattered nerves, the ringing sensation in his ears, and the madness which turned his brain, Villefort rose as he perceived her. The proofs, said the president. "Remember, this tissue of horrors must be supported by the clearest proofs." "The proofs," said Benedetto, laughing. "Do you want proofs?" "Yes." "Well then, look at Monsieur de Villefort, and then ask me for proofs." Everyone turned towards the procureur, who, unable to bear the universal gaze now riveted on him alone, advanced staggering into the midst of the tribunal, with his hair disheveled and his face indented with the mark of his nails. The whole assembly uttered a long murmur of astonishment. "Father," said Benedetto, "I am asked for proofs. Do you wish me to give them?" "No, no, it is useless," stammered Monsieur de Villefort in a hoarse voice. "No, it is useless." "How useless?" cried the president. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I feel it impossible to struggle against this deadly weight which crushes me. Gentlemen, I know I am in the hands of an avenging God. We need no proofs. Everything relating to this young man is true." A dull, gloomy silence, like that which precedes some awful phenomenon of nature, pervaded the assembly, who shuddered in dismay. "What, Monsieur de Villefort?" cried the president. "Do you yield to an hallucination? What? Are you no longer in possession of your senses? This strange, unexpected, terrible accusation has disordered your reason. Come, recover." The procureur dropped his head. His teeth chattered like those of a man under a violent attack of fever, and yet he was deadly pale. "I am in possession of all my senses, sir," he said. "My body alone suffers, as you may suppose. I acknowledge myself guilty of all the young man has brought against me, and from this hour hold myself under the authority of the procureur who will succeed me." And as he spoke these words with a hoarse, choking voice, he staggered towards the door, which was mechanically opened by a doorkeeper. The whole assembly were dumb with astonishment at the revelation and confession which had produced a catastrophe so different from that which had been expected during the last fortnight by the Parisian world. "Well," said Beauchamp, "let them now say that drama is unnatural." "Ma foi," said Château-Renaud, "I would rather end my career like Monsieur de Morcerf. A pistol shot seems quite delightful compared with this catastrophe." "And, moreover, it kills," said Beauchamp. "And to think that I had an idea of marrying his daughter," said Debray. "She did well to die, poor girl." "The sitting is adjourned, gentlemen," said the president. "Fresh inquiries will be made, and the case will be tried next session by another magistrate." As for Andrea, who was calm and more interesting than ever, he left the hall, escorted by gendarmes, who involuntarily paid him some attention. "Well, what do you think of this, my fine fellow?" asked Debray of the sergeant-at-arms, slipping a louis into his hand. "There will be extenuating circumstances," he replied. And now, chapter 111, Expiation. Notwithstanding the density of the crowd, Monsieur de Villefort saw it open before him. There is something so awe-inspiring in great afflictions that even in the worst times the first emotion of a crowd has generally been to sympathize with the sufferer in a great catastrophe. Some people have been assassinated in a tumult, but even criminals have rarely been insulted during trial. Thus Villefort passed through the mass of spectators and officers of the Palais and withdrew. Though he had acknowledged his guilt, he was protected by his grief. There are some situations which men understand by instinct, but which reason is powerless to explain. In such cases, the greatest poet is he who gives utterance to the most natural and vehement outburst of sorrow. Those who hear the bitter cry are to be much impressed as if they listened to an entire poem, and when the sufferer is sincere, they are right in regarding his outburst as sublime. It would be difficult to describe the state of stupor in which Villefort left the Palais. Every pulse beat with feverish excitement. Every nerve was strained, every vein swollen, and every part of his body seemed to suffer distinctly from the rest, thus multiplying his agony 1,000-fold. He made his way along the corridors through force of habit. He threw aside his magisterial robe, not out of deference to etiquette, but because it was an unbearable burden, a veritable garb of Nessus, insatiate in torture. Having staggered as far as the Rue Dauphine, he perceived his carriage, awoke his sleeping coachman by opening the door himself, threw himself on the cushions, and pointed towards the Faubourg Saint-Honoré. The carriage drove on. All the weight of his fallen fortune seemed suddenly to crush him. He could not foresee the consequences. He could not contemplate the future with the indifference of the hardened criminal who merely faces a contingency already familiar. God was still in his heart. God, he murmured, not knowing what he said. God, God! Behind the event that had overwhelmed him, he saw the hand of God. The carriage rolled rapidly onward. Villefort, while turning restlessly on the cushions, felt something press against him. He put out his hand to remove the object. It was a fan which Madame de Villefort had left in the carriage. This fan awakened a recollection which darted through his mind like lightning. He thought of his wife. "Oh!" he exclaimed, as though a red-hot iron were piercing his heart. During the last hour, his own crime had alone been presented to his mind. Now another object, not less terrible, suddenly presented itself. His wife. He had just acted the inexorable judge with her. He had condemned her to death. And she, crushed by remorse, struck with terror, covered with the shame inspired by the eloquence of his irreproachable virtue. She, a poor, weak woman, without help or the power of defending herself against his absolute and supreme will, she might, at that very moment, perhaps, be preparing to die. An hour had elapsed since her condemnation. At that moment, doubtless, she was recalling all her crimes to her memory. She was asking pardon for her sins. Perhaps she was even writing a letter imploring forgiveness from her virtuous husband, a forgiveness she was purchasing with her death. Villefort again groaned with anguish and despair. "Ah," he exclaimed, "that woman became criminal only from associating with me. I carried the infection of crime with me, and she has caught it, as she would the typhus fever, the cholera, the plague. And yet I have punished her. I have dared to tell her. I have. Repent and die. But no, she must not die. She shall live, and with me. We will flee from Paris and go as far as the earth reaches. I told her of the scaffold. Oh, heavens, I forgot that it awaits me also. How could I pronounce that word? Yes, we will fly. I will confess all to her. I will tell her daily that I also have committed a crime. Oh, what an alliance, the tiger and the serpent, worthy wife of such as I am. She must live, that my infamy may diminish hers." And Villefort dashed open the window in front of the carriage. "Faster, faster!" he cried, in a tone which electrified the coachman. The horses, impelled by fear, flew towards the house. "Yes, yes," repeated Villefort as he approached his house. "Yes, that woman must live. She must repent and educate my son, the sole survivor, with the exception of the indestructible old man, of the wreck of my house. She loves him. It was for his sake she has committed these crimes. We ought never to despair of softening the heart of a mother who loves her child. She will repent, and no one will know that she has been guilty. The events which have taken place in my house, though they now occupy the public mind, will be forgotten in time. Or if, indeed, a few enemies should persist in remembering them, why then I will add them to my list of crimes. What will it signify if 1, 2, or 3 more are added? My wife and child shall escape from this gulf, carrying treasures with them. She will live and may yet be happy, since her child, in whom all her love is centered, will be with her. I shall have performed a good action, and my heart will be lighter." And the procurer breathed more freely than he had done for some time. The carriage stopped at the door of the house. Villefort leapt out of the carriage and saw that his servants were surprised at his early return. He could read no other expression on their features. Neither of them spoke to him. They merely stood aside to let him pass by, as usual, nothing more. As he passed by Monsieur Noirtier's room, he perceived two figures through the half-open door, but he experienced no curiosity to know who was visiting his father. Anxiety carried him on further. "Come," he said, as he ascended the stairs leading to his wife's room. "Nothing has changed here." He then closed the door of the landing. "No one must disturb us," he said. "I must speak freely to her, accuse myself, and say—" He approached the door, touched the crystal handle, which yielded to his hand. "Not locked!" he cried. "That is well." As he entered the little room in which Edward slept, for though the child went to school during the day, his mother could not allow him to be separated from her at night. With a single glance, Villefort's eye ran through the room. "Not here," he said. "Doubtless she is in her bedroom." He rushed towards the door, found it bolted, and stopped, shuddering. "Eloise!" he cried. He fancied he heard the sound of a piece of furniture being removed. "Eloise!" he repeated. "Who is there?" answered the voice of her he sought. He thought that voice more feeble than usual. "Open the door!" cried Villefort. "Open! It is I!" But notwithstanding this request, notwithstanding the tone of anguish in which it was uttered, the door remained closed. Villefort burst it open with a violent blow. At the entrance of the room which led to her boudoir, Madame de Villefort was standing erect, pale, her features contracted, and her eyes glaring horribly. "Eloise, Eloise," he said, "what is the matter? Speak!" The young woman extended her stiff white hands towards him. "It is done, monsieur," she said, with a rattling noise which seemed to tear her throat. "What more do you want?" And she fell full length on the floor. Villefort ran to her and seized her hand, which convulsively clasped a crystal bottle with a golden stopper. Madame de Villefort was dead. Villefort, maddened with horror, stepped back to the threshold of the door, fixing his eyes on the corpse. "My son!" he exclaimed suddenly. "Where is my son? Edward! Edward!" And he rushed out of the room, still crying, "Edward! Edward!" The name was pronounced in such a tone of anguish that the servants ran up. "Where is my son?" asked Villefort. "Let him be removed from the house, that he may not see—" "Master Edward is not downstairs, sir," replied the valet. "Then he must be playing in the garden. Go and see." "No, sir. Madame de Villefort sent for him half an hour ago. He went into her room and has not been downstairs since." A cold perspiration burst out on Villefort's brow. His legs trembled, and his thoughts flew about madly in his brain like the wheels of a disordered watch. "In Madame de Villefort's room?" he murmured, and slowly returned, with one hand wiping his forehead, and with the other supporting himself against the wall. To enter the room, he must again see the body of his unfortunate wife. To call Edward, he must reawaken the echo of that room which now appeared like a sepulchre. To speak seemed like violating the silence of the tomb. His tongue was paralyzed in his mouth. "Edward," he stammered. "Edward!" The child did not answer. Where then could he be, if he had entered his mother's room and not since returned? He stepped forward. The corpse of Madame de Villefort was stretched across the doorway leading to the room in which Edward must be. Those glaring eyes seemed to watch over the threshold, and the lips bore the stamp of a terrible and mysterious irony. Through the open door was visible a portion of the boudoir, containing an upright piano and a blue satin couch. Villefort stepped forward 2 or 3 paces, and beheld his child lying, no doubt asleep, on the sofa. The unhappy man uttered an exclamation of joy. A ray of light seemed to penetrate the abyss of despair and darkness. He had only to step over the corpse, enter the boudoir, take the child in his arms, and flee far, far away. Villefort was no longer the civilized man. He was a tiger, hurt unto death, gnashing his teeth in his wound. He no longer feared realities, but phantoms. He leapt over the corpse as if it had been a burning brazier. He took the child in his arms, embraced him, shook him, called him, but the child made no response. He pressed his burning lips to the cheeks, but they were icy cold and pale. He felt the stiffened limbs. He pressed his hand upon the heart, but it no longer beat. The child was dead. A folded paper fell from Edward's breast. Villefort, thunderstruck, fell upon his knees. The child dropped from his arms and rolled on the floor by the side of its mother. He picked up the paper and, recognizing his wife's writing, ran his eyes rapidly over the contents. It ran as follows: "You know that I was a good mother. Since it was for my son's sake I became criminal. A good mother cannot depart without her son." Villefort could not believe his eyes. He could not believe his reason. He dragged himself towards the child's body and examined it as a lioness contemplates its dead cub. Then a piercing cry escaped from his breast, and he cried, "Still the hand of God!" The presence of the two victims alarmed him. He could not bear solitude shared only by two corpses. Until then he had been sustained by rage, by his strength of mind, by despair, by the supreme agony which led the Titans to scale the heavens and Ajax to defy the gods. He now arose, his head bowed beneath the weight of grief, and shaking his damp, disheveled hair, he who had never felt compassion for anyone, determined to seek his father, that he might have someone to whom he could relate his misfortunes, someone by whose side he might weep. He descended the little staircase with which we are acquainted and entered Noirtier's room. The old man appeared to be listening attentively and as affectionately as his infirmities would allow to the Abbé Busoni, who looked cold and calm as usual. Villefort, perceiving the abbé, passed his hand across his brow. The past came to him like one of those waves whose wrath foams fiercer than the others. He recollected the call he had made upon him after the dinner at Auteuil, and then the visit the abbé had himself paid to his house on the day of Valentine's death. "You here, sir!" he exclaimed. "Do you, then, never appear but to act as an escort to death?" Busoni turned around, and perceiving the excitement depicted on the magistrate's face, the savage luster of his eyes, he understood that the revelation had been made at the assizes, but beyond this he was ignorant. "I came to pray over the body of your daughter. And now why are you here?" "I come to tell you that you have sufficiently repaid your debt, and that from this moment I will pray to God to forgive you, as I do." "Good heavens!" exclaimed Villefort, stepping back fearfully. "Surely that is not the voice of the Abbé Busoni." "No." The abbé threw off his wig, shook his head, and his hair, no longer confined, fell in black masses around his manly face. "It is the face of the Count of Monte Cristo!" exclaimed the procureur with a haggard expression. "You are not exactly right, Monsieur Procureur. You must go further back." That voice! That voice! Where did I first hear it?" "You heard it for the first time at Marseille, 23 years ago, the day of your marriage with Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran. Refer to your papers." "You are not Busoni? You are not Monte Cristo? Oh, heavens! You are, then, some secret, implacable, and mortal enemy! I must have wronged you in some way at Marseille. Oh, woe to me!" "Yes, you are now on the right path," said the Count, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "Search, search." "But what have I done to you?" exclaimed Villefort, whose mind was bouncing between reason and insanity in that cloud which is neither a dream nor reality. "What have I done to you? Tell me, then. Speak." "You condemned me to a horrible, tedious death. You killed my father. You deprived me of liberty, of love, and happiness." "Who are you, then? Who are you?" "I am the specter of a wretch you buried in the dungeons of the Chateau d'If. God gave that specter the form of the Count of Monte Cristo when he at length issued from his tomb, enriched him with gold and diamonds, and led him to you." "Ah, I recognize you. I recognize you," exclaimed the king's attorney. "You are—" "I am Edmond Dantès." "You are Edmond Dantès!" cried Villefort, seizing the count by the wrist. "Then come here." And up the stairs he dragged Monte Cristo, who, ignorant of what had happened, followed him in astonishment, foreseeing some new catastrophe. "There, Edmond Dantès," he said, pointing to the bodies of his wife and child. "See, are you well avenged?" Monte Cristo became pale at this horrible sight. He felt that he had passed beyond the bounds of vengeance, and that he could no longer say, "God is for and with me." With an expression of indescribable anguish, he threw himself upon the body of the child, reopened its eyes, felt its pulse, and then rushed with him into Valentine's room, of which he double-locked the door. "My child!" cried Villefort. "He carries away the body of my child! Oh, curses! Woe! Death to you!" He tried to follow Monte Cristo, but as though in a dream he was transfixed to the spot. His eyes glared as though they were starting through the sockets. He gripped the flesh on his chest until his nails were stained with blood. The veins of his temples swelled and boiled as though they would burst their narrow boundary and deluge his brain with living fire. This lasted several minutes until the frightful overturn of reason was accomplished. Then, uttering a loud cry, followed by a burst of laughter, he rushed down the stairs. A quarter of an hour afterwards, the door of Valentine's room opened, and Monte Cristo reappeared. Pale, with a dull eye and heavy heart, all the noble features of that face, usually so calm and serene, were overcast by grief. In his arms he held the child, whom no skill had been able to recall to life. Bending on one knee, he placed it reverently by the side of its mother, with its head upon her breast. Then, rising, he went out, and meeting a servant on the stairs, he asked, "Where is Monsieur de Villefort?" The servant, instead of answering, pointed to the garden. Monte Cristo ran down the steps, and advancing towards the spot designated, beheld Villefort, encircled by his servants, with a spade in his hand, and digging the earth with fury. It is not here," he cried. "It is not here!" And then he moved farther on, and began again to dig. Monte Cristo approached him, and said in a low voice, with an expression almost humble, "Sir, you have indeed lost a son, but—" Villefort interrupted him. He had neither listened nor heard. "Oh, I will find it!" he cried. "You may pretend he is not here, but I will find him, though I dig forever." Monte Cristo drew back in horror. "Oh," he said, "he is mad." And as though he feared that the walls of the accursed house would crumble around him, he rushed into the street, for the first time doubting whether he had the right to do as he had done. "Oh, enough of this, he cried. "Let me save the last." On entering his house, he met Morrel, who wandered about like a ghost, awaiting the heavenly mandate for return to the tomb. "Prepare yourself, Maximilian," he said with a smile. "We leave Paris tomorrow." "Have you nothing more to do here?" asked Morrel. "No," replied Monte Cristo. "God grant I may not have done too much already." The next day they indeed left, accompanied only by Baptistine. Haydée had taken away Ali, and Bertuccio remained with Noirtier. Okay. That's quite a lot of drama, but we've got one more chapter for today. Whew. Chapter 112, The Departure. The recent events formed the theme of conversation throughout all Paris. Emmanuel and his wife conversed with natural astonishment in their little apartment in the Rue Meslay upon the 3 successive, sudden, and most unexpected catastrophes of Morcerf, Danglars, and Villefort. Maximilian, who was paying them a visit, listened to their conversation, or rather was present at it, plunged in his accustomed state of apathy. "Indeed," said Julie, "might we not almost fancy, Emmanuel, that those people, so rich, so happy but yesterday, had forgotten in their prosperity that an evil genius, like the wicked fairies in Perrault's stories, who present themselves unbidden at a wedding or baptism, hovered over them and appeared all at once to revenge himself for their fatal neglect?" "What a dire misfortune," said Emmanuel, thinking of Morcerf and Danglars. "What dreadful sufferings," said Julie, remembering Valentine, but whom, with a delicacy natural to women, she did not name before her brother. "If the Supreme Being has directed the fatal blow," said Emmanuel, "it must be that he in his great goodness has perceived nothing in the past lives of these people to merit mitigation of their awful punishment." "Do you not form a very rash judgment, Emmanuel?" said Julie. "When my father, with a pistol in his hand, was once on the point of committing suicide, had anyone then said, 'This man deserves his misery,' would not that person have been deceived?" "Yes, but your father was not allowed to fall. A being was commissioned to arrest the fatal hand of death about to descend on him." Emmanuel had scarcely uttered these words when the sound of the bell was heard, the well-known signal given by the porter that a visitor had arrived. Nearly at the same instant the door was opened and the Count of Monte Cristo appeared on the threshold. The young people uttered a cry of joy, while Maximilian raised his head, but let it fall again immediately. "Maximilian," said the Count, without appearing to notice the different impressions which his presence produced on the little circle, "I come to seek you." "To seek me?" replied Morrel, as if awakening from a dream. "Yes," said Monte Cristo. "Has it not been agreed that I should take you with me? And did I not tell you yesterday to prepare for departure?" "I am ready," said Maximilian. "I came expressly to wish them farewell." "Whither are you going, Count?" asked Julie. "In the first instance to Marseille, madame." "To Marseille!" exclaimed the young couple. "Yes, and I take your brother with me." "Oh, Count," said Julie, "will you restore him to us, cured of his melancholy?" Morrel turned away to conceal the confusion of his countenance. "You perceive, then, that he is not happy?" said the Count. "Yes," replied the young woman, "and fear much that he finds our home but a dull one." "I will undertake to divert him," replied the Count. "I am ready to accompany you," said Morrel. "Adieu, my kind friends. Emmanuel, Julie, farewell." "How farewell?" exclaimed Julie. "Do you leave us thus, so suddenly, without any preparations for your journey, without even a passport?" "Needless delays but increase the grief of parting," said Monte Cristo, "and Maximilian has doubtless provided himself with everything requisite. At least I advised him to do so." "I have a passport, and my clothes are ready packed," said Morrel, in his tranquil but mournful manner. "Good," said Monte Cristo, smiling. "In these prompt arrangements we recognize the order of a well-disciplined soldier." "And you leave us," said Julie, "at a moment's warning? You do not give us a day, no, not even an hour before your departure?" "My carriage is at the door, madame, and I must be in Rome in 5 days." "But does Maximilian go to Rome?" exclaimed Emmanuel. "I am going wherever it may please the Count to take me," said Morrel, with a smile full of grief. "I am under his orders for the next month." "Oh, heavens! How strangely he expresses himself, Count," said Julie. "Maximilian goes with me," said the Count, in his kindest and most persuasive manner. "Therefore do not make yourself uneasy on your brother's account." "Once more, farewell, my dear sister, and Emmanuel, adieu," Morrel repeated. "His carelessness and indifference touch me to the heart," said Julie. "Oh, Maximilian, Maximilian, You are certainly concealing something from us. Pshaw, said Monte Cristo. You will see him return to you gay, smiling, and joyful. Maximilian cast a look of disdain, almost of anger, on the Count. We must leave you, said Monte Cristo. Before you quit us, Count, said Julie, will you permit us to express to you all that the other day— Madame, interrupted the Count, taking her two hands in his, all that you could say in words would never express what I read in your eyes. The thoughts of your heart are fully understood by mine. Like benefactors in romances, I should have left you without— like benefactors in romances, I should have left you without seeing you again, but that would have been a virtue beyond my strength, because I am a weak and vain man, fond of the tender, kind, and thankful glances of my fellow creatures. On the eve of departure, I carry my egotism so far as to say, do not forget me, my kind friends, for probably you will never see me again. Never see you again, exclaimed Emmanuel, while two large tears rolled down Julie's cheeks. Never behold you again? It is not a man, then, but some angel that leaves us, and this angel is on the point of returning to heaven after having appeared on earth to do good. Say not so, quickly returned Monte Cristo. Say not so, my friends. Angels never err. Celestial beings remain where they wish to be. Fate is not more powerful than they. It is they who, on the contrary, overcome fate. No, Emmanuel, I am but a man, and your admiration is as unmerited as your words are sacrilegious. And pressing his lips on the hand of Julie, who rushed into his arms, he extended his other hand to Emmanuel. Then tearing himself from this abode of peace and happiness, he made a sign to Maximilian, who followed him passively, with the indifference which had been imperceptible in him ever since the death of Valentine had so stunned him. Restore my brother to peace and happiness, whispered Julie to Monte Cristo, and the Count pressed her hand in reply, as he had done 11 years before, on the staircase leading to Morel's study. You still confide, then, in Sinbad the Sailor? Asked he, smiling. Oh, yes, was the ready answer. Well, then, sleep in peace, and put your trust in the Lord. As we have said before, the post-chaise was waiting. 4 powerful horses were already pawing the ground with impatience, while Ali, apparently just arrived from a long walk, was standing at the door of the steps, his face bathed in perspiration. Well, asked the Count in Arabic, have you been to see the old man? Ali made a sign in the affirmative. And have you placed the letter before him, as I ordered you to do? The slave respectfully signalized that he had. And what did he say, or rather do? Ali placed himself in the light so that his master might see him distinctly, and then imitating in his intelligent manner the countenance of the old man, he closed his eyes, as Noirtier was in the custom of doing when saying, Yes. Good, he accepts, said Monte Cristo. Now let us go. These words had scarcely escaped him when the carriage was on its way, and the feet of the horses struck a shower of sparks from the pavement. Maximilian settled himself in his corner without uttering a word. Half an hour had passed when the carriage stopped suddenly. The Count had just pulled the silken check string which was fastened to Ali's finger. The Nubian immediately descended and opened the carriage door. It was a lovely starlight night. They had just reached the top of the hill Villejuif, from which Paris appears like a somber sea tossing its millions of phosphoric waves into light. Waves indeed more noisy, more passionate, more changeable, more furious, more greedy than those of the tempestuous ocean. Waves which never rest as those of the sea sometimes do. Waves ever dashing, ever foaming, ever engulfing what falls within their grasp. The Count stood alone, and at a sign from his hand, the carriage went on for a short distance. With folded arms he gazed for some time upon the great city. When he had fixed his piercing look on this modern Babylon, which equally engages the contemplation of the religious enthusiast, the materialist, and the scoffer, Great city, murmured he, inclining his head and joining his hands as if in prayer. Less than 6 months have elapsed since first I entered thy gates. I believe that the Spirit of God led my steps to thee, and that he also enables me to quit thee in triumph. The secret cause of my presence within thy walls I have confided alone to him who only has had the power to read my heart. God only knows that I retire from thee without pride or hatred, but not without many regrets. He only knows that the power confided in me has never been made subservient to my personal good or to any useless cause. O great city, it is thy palpitating bosom that I have found that which I sought. Like a patient miner, I have dug deep into thy very entrails to root out evil thence. Now my work is accomplished. My mission is terminated. Now thou canst neither afford me pain nor pleasure. Adieu, Paris. Adieu. His look wandered over the vast plain like that of some genius of the night. He passed his hand over his brow, got into the carriage. The door was closed on him, and the vehicle quickly disappeared down the other side of the hill in a whirlwind of dust and noise. 10 leagues were passed, and not a single word was uttered. Morel was dreaming, and Monte Cristo was looking at the dreamer. "Morel," said the Count to him at last, "do you repent having followed me?" "No, Count, but to leave Paris." "If I thought happiness might await you in Paris, Morel, I would have left you there." "Valentine reposes within the walls of Paris, and to leave Paris is like losing her a second time." "Maximilian," said the Count, "the friends that we have lost do not repose in the bosom of the earth, but are buried deep in our hearts, and it has been thus ordained that we may always be accompanied by them. I have 2 friends who in this way never depart from me, the one who gave me being, and the other who conferred knowledge and intelligence on me. Their spirits live in me. I consult them when doubtful, and if I ever do any good, it is due to their beneficent counsels. Listen to the voice of your heart, Morel, and ask it whether you ought to preserve this melancholy exterior towards me." "My friend," said Maximilian, "the voice of my heart is very sorrowful, and promises me nothing but misfortune." "It is the way of weakened minds to see everything through a black cloud. The soul forms its own horizons. Your soul is darkened, and consequently the sky of the future appears stormy and unpromising." "And that may possibly be true," said Maximilian, and he again subsided into his thoughtful mood. The journey was performed with that marvelous rapidity which the unlimited power of the Count ever commanded. Towns fled from them like shadows on their path, and trees, shaken by the first winds of autumn, seemed like giants madly rushing on to meet them, and retreating as rapidly when once reached. The following morning they arrived at Chalons, where the Count's steamboat waited for them. Without the loss of an instant, the carriage was placed on board, and the 2 travelers embarked without delay. The boat was built for speed. Her 2 paddle wheels were like 2 wings, with which she skimmed the water like a bird. Morel was not insensible to that sensation of delight which is generally experienced in passing rapidly through the air, and the wind, which occasionally raised the hair from his forehead, seemed on the point of dispelling momentarily the clouds collected there. Sorry, the phone called to get through. Let me go back. As the distance increased between the travelers and Paris, almost superhuman serenity appeared to surround the Count. He might have been taken for an exile about to revisit his native land. Ere long Marseille presented herself to view. Marseille, white, fervid, full of life and energy. Marseille, the younger sister of Tyre and Carthage, the successor to them in the empire of the Mediterranean. Marseille, old, yet always young. Powerful memories were stirred within them by the sight of the Round Tower, Fort St. Nicholas, the city hall designed by Puget, the port with its brick quays where they had both played in childhood, and it was with one accord that they stopped on the Canebière. A vessel was setting sail for Algiers, on board of which the bustle usually attending departure prevailed. The passengers and their relations crowded on the deck, friends taking a tender but sorrowful leave of each other, some weeping, others noisy in their grief, the whole forming a spectacle that might be exciting even to those who witnessed similar sights daily, but which had no power to disturb the current of thought that had taken possession of the mind of Maximilian from the moment he had set foot on the broad pavement of the quay. "Here," said he, leaning heavily on the arm of Monte Cristo, "here is the spot where my father stopped when the Pharaon entered the port. It was here that the good old man, whom you saved from death and dishonor, threw himself into my arms. I yet feel his warm tears on my face, and his were not the only tears shed, for many who witnessed our meeting wept also. Monte Cristo gently smiled and said, I was there, at the same time pointing to the corner of a street. As he spoke, and in the very direction he indicated, a groan, expressive of bitter grief, was heard, and a woman was seen waving her hand to a passenger on board the vessel about to sail. Monte Cristo looked at her with an emotion that must have been remarked by Morrel, had not his eyes been fixed on the vessel. "Oh, heavens!" exclaimed Morrel, "I do not deceive myself. That young man who is waving his hat, that youth in the uniform of a lieutenant, is Albert de Morcerf." "Yes," said Monte Cristo, "I recognized him." "How so? You were looking the other way." The count smiled, as he was in the habit of doing when he did not want to make any reply, and he again turned towards the veiled woman, who soon disappeared at the corner of the street. Turning to his friend, "Dear Maximilian," said the count, "have you nothing to do in this land?" "I have to weep over the grave of my father," replied Morrel in a broken voice. "Well then, go. Wait for me there, and I will soon join you." "You leave me then?" "Yes. I also have a pious visit to pay." Morrel allowed his hand to fall into that which the count extended to him. Then, with an inexpressibly sorrowful inclination of the head, he quitted the count and bent his steps to the east of the city. Monte Cristo remained on the same spot until Maximilian was out of sight. He then walked slowly towards the Allée des Mélanes to seek out a small house with which our readers were made familiar at the beginning of this story. It yet stood, under the shade of the fine avenue of lime trees which forms one of the most frequent walks of the idlers of Marseille, covered by an immense vine which spreads its aged and blackened branches over the stone front, burnt yellow by the ardent sun of the south. 2 stone steps worn away by the friction of many feet led to the door, which was made of 3 planks. The door had never been painted or varnished, so great cracks yawned in it during the dry season, to close again when the rains came on. The house, with all its crumbling antiquity and apparent misery, was yet cheerful and picturesque, and was the same that old Dantès formerly inhabited, the only difference being that the old man occupied merely the garret, while the whole house was now placed at the command of Mercédès by the count. The woman whom the count had seen leave the ship with so much regret entered this house. She had scarcely closed the door after her when Monte Cristo appeared at the corner of the street, so that he found and lost her again almost at the same instant. The worn-out steps were old acquaintances of his. He knew better than anyone else how to open that weather-beaten door with the large-headed nail which served to raise the latch within. He entered without knocking or giving any other intimation of his presence, as if he had been a friend or the master of the place. At the end of a passage paved with bricks was a little garden, bathed in sunshine and rich in warmth and light. In this garden Mercédès had found, at the place indicated by the count, the sum of money which he, through his sense of delicacy, had described as having been placed there 24 years previously. The trees of the garden were easily seen from the steps of the street door. Monte Cristo, on stepping into the house, heard a sigh that was almost a deep sob. He looked in the direction whence it came, and there, under an arbor of Virginia jessamine, with its thick foliage and beautiful long purple flowers, he saw Mercédès seated, with her head bowed and weeping bitterly. She had raised her veil, and with her face hidden by her hands was giving free scope to the sighs and tears which had been so long restrained by the presence of her son. Monte Cristo advanced a few steps, which were heard on the gravel. Mercédès raised her head and uttered a cry of terror on beholding a man before her. "Madame," said the count, "it is no longer in my power to restore you to happiness, but I offer you consolation. Will you deign to accept it as coming from a friend?" "I am indeed most wretched," replied Mercédès, "alone in the world. I had but my son, and he has left me." "He possesses a noble heart, madame," replied the count, "and he has acted rightly. He feels that every man owes a tribute to his country, Some contribute their talents, others their industry. These devote their blood, those their nightly labors to the same cause. Had he remained with you, his life must have become a hateful burden, nor would he have participated in your griefs. He will increase in strength and honor by struggling with adversity, which he will convert into prosperity. Leave him to build up the future for you, and I venture to say you will confide it to safe hands." "Oh," replied the wretched woman, mournfully shaking her head, "the prosperity of which you speak, and which, from the bottom of my heart, I pray God in his mercy to grant him, I can never enjoy. The bitter cup of adversity has been drained by me to the very dregs, and I feel that the grave is not far distant. You have acted kindly, Count, in bringing me back to the place where I have enjoyed so much bliss. I ought to meet death on the same spot where happiness was once all my own." "Alas," said Monte Cristo, "your words sear and embitter my heart, the more so as you have every reason to hate me. I have been the cause of all your misfortunes, but why do you pity instead of blaming me? You render me still more unhappy. Hate you! Blame you! You, Edmund! Hate, reproach the man that has spared my son's life? For was it not your fatal and sanguinary intention to destroy that son of whom Monsieur de Morcerf was so proud? Oh, look at me closely and discover, if you can, even the semblance of a reproach in me." The Count looked up and fixed his eyes on Mercédès, who arose partly from her seat and extended both her hands towards him. "Oh, look at me," continued she, with a feeling of profound melancholy. "My eyes no longer dazzle by their brilliancy, for the time has long fled since I used to smile on Edmond Dantès, who anxiously looked out for me from the window of yonder garret, then inhabited by his old father. Years of grief have created an abyss between those days and the present. I neither reproach you nor hate you, my friend. Oh no, Edmund, it is myself that I blame, myself that I hate. Oh, miserable creature that I am!" cried she, clasping her hands and raising her eyes to heaven. "I once possessed piety, innocence, and love, the three ingredients of the happiness of angels, and now, what am I?" Monte Cristo approached her and silently took her hand. "No," said she, withdrawing it gently. "No, my friend, touch me not. You have spared me, yet of all those who have fallen under your vengeance, I was the most guilty. They were influenced by hatred, by avarice, and by self-love. But I was base, and for want of courage acted against my judgment. Nay, do not press my hand, Edmund. You are thinking, I am sure, of some kind speech to console me, but do not utter it to me. Reserve it for others more worthy of your kindness. See," and she exposed her face completely to view, "see, misfortune has silvered my hair. My eyes have shed so many tears that they are encircled by a rim of purple, and my brow is wrinkled. You, Edmund, on the contrary, you are still young, handsome, dignified. It is because you have had faith, because you have had strength, because you have had trust in God, and God has sustained you. But as for me, I have been a coward. I have denied God, and he has abandoned me." Mercédès burst into tears. Her woman's heart was breaking under its load of memories. Monte Cristo took her hand and imprinted a kiss on it, but she herself felt that it was a kiss of no greater warmth than he would have bestowed on the hand of some marble statue of a saint. "It often happens," continued she, "that a first fault destroys the prospects of a whole life. I believed you dead. Why did I survive you? What good has it done me to mourn for you eternally in the secret recesses of my heart, only to make a woman of 39 look like a woman of 50? Why, having recognized you, and I the only one to do so, why was I able to save my son alone? Ought I not also to have rescued the man that I had accepted for a husband, guilty though he were? Yet I let him die. What do I say? Oh, merciful heavens, was I not accessory to his death by my supine insensibility, by my contempt for him, not remembering or not willing to remember that it was for my sake he had become a traitor and a perjurer? And in what am I benefited by accompanying my son so far, since I now abandon him and allow him to depart alone to the baneful climate of Africa? Oh, I have been base, cowardly, I tell you. I have abjured my affections, and like all renegades, I am of evil omen to those who surround me. No, Mercédès, said Monte Cristo, no, you judge yourself with too much severity. You are a noble-minded woman, and it was your grief that disarmed me. Still, I was but an agent, led on by an invisible and offended deity who chose not to withhold the fatal blow that I was destined to hurl. I take that God to witness, at whose feet I have prostrated myself daily for the last 10 years, that I would have sacrificed my life to you, and with my life the projects that were indissolubly linked to with it. But, and I say it with some pride, Mercédès, God needed me, and I lived. Examine the past and the present, and endeavor to dive into futurity, and then say whether I am not a divine instrument. The most dreadful misfortunes, the most frightful sufferings, the abandonment of all those who loved me, the persecution of those who did not know me, formed the trials of my youth, when suddenly, from captivity, solitude, misery, I was restored to light and liberty, and became the possessor of a fortune so brilliant, so unbounded, so unheard of, that I must have been blind not to be conscious that God had endowed me with it to work out his own great designs. From that time, I looked upon this fortune as something confided to me for a particular purpose. Not a thought was given to a life which you once, Mercédès, had the power to render blissful. Not 1 hour of peaceful calm was mine, but I felt myself driven on like an exterminating angel. Like adventurous captains about to embark on some enterprise full of danger, I laid in my provisions. I loaded my weapons. I collected every means of attack and defense. I inured my body to the most violent exercises, my soul to the bitterest trials. I taught my arm to slay, my eyes to behold excruciating sufferings, and my mouth to smile at the most horrid spectacles. Good-natured, confiding, and forgiving as I had been, I became revengeful, cunning, and wicked, or rather immovable as fate. Then I launched out into the path that was open to me. I overcame every obstacle and reached the goal, but woe to those who stood in my pathway. Enough, said Mercédès, enough, Edmund. Believe me that she who alone recognized you has been the only one to comprehend you, and had she crossed your path, and you had crushed her like glass, still, Edmund, still she must have admired you. Like the gulf between me and the past, there is an abyss between you, Edmund, and the rest of mankind. And I tell you freely that the comparison I draw between you and other men will ever be one of my greatest tortures. No, there is nothing in the world to resemble you in worth and goodness. But we must say farewell, Edmund, and let us part. Before I leave you, Mercédès, have you no request to make? Said the Count. I desire but one thing in the world, Edmund, the happiness of my son. Pray to the Almighty to spare his life, and I will take upon myself to promote his happiness. Thank you, Edmund. But have you no request to make for yourself, Mercédès? For myself I want nothing. I live, as it were, between two graves. One is that of Edmond Dantès, lost to me long, long since. He had my love. That word ill becomes my faded lip now, but it is a memory dear to my heart, and one that I would not lose for all that the world contains. The other grave is that of the man who met his death from the hand of Edmond Dantès. I approve of the deed, but I must pray for the dead. Your son shall be happy, Mercédès, repeated the Count. Then I shall enjoy as much happiness as this world can possibly confer. But what are your intentions? Mercédès smiled sadly. To say that I shall live here like the Mercédès of other times, gaining my bread by labor, would not be true, nor would you believe me. I have no longer the strength to do anything but to spend my days in prayer. However, I shall have no occasion to work, for the little sum of money buried by you, and which I found in the place you mentioned, will be sufficient to maintain me. Rumor will probably be busy respecting me, my occupations, my manner of living. That will signify but little. That concerns God, you, and myself. Mercédès, said the Count, I do not say it to blame you, but you made an unnecessary sacrifice in relinquishing the whole of the fortune amassed by Monsieur de Morcerf. Half of it, at least by right, belonged to you, in virtue of your vigilance and economy. I perceive what you are intending to propose to me, but I cannot accept it, Edmond. My son would not permit it. Nothing shall be done without the full approbation of Albert de Morcerf. I will make myself acquainted with his intentions and will submit to them. But if he be willing to accept my offers, will you oppose them? You well know, Edmond, that I am no longer a reasoning creature. I have no will, unless it be the will never to decide. I have been so overwhelmed by the many storms that have broken over my head that I am become passive in the hands of the Almighty, like a sparrow in the talons of an eagle. I live because it is not ordained for me to die. If succor be sent to me, I will accept it. Ah, madame, said Monte Cristo, you should not talk thus. It is not so we should evince our resignation to the will of heaven. On the contrary, we are all free agents. Alas, exclaimed Mercédès, if it were so, if I possessed free will, but without the power to render that will efficacious, it would drive me to despair. Monte Cristo dropped his head and shrank from the vehemence of her grief. Will you not even say you will see me again? He asked. On the contrary, we shall meet again, said Mercédès, pointing to heaven with solemnity. I tell you so to prove to you that I still hope. And after pressing her own trembling hand upon that of the Count, Mercédès rushed up the stairs and disappeared. Monte Cristo slowly left the house and turned towards the quay. But Mercédès did not witness his departure, though she was seated at the little window of the room which had been occupied by old Dantès. Her eyes were straining to see the ship which was carrying her son over the vast sea, but still her voice involuntarily murmured softly, Edmond, Edmond, Edmond. And that concludes today's readings, chapters 110 through 112. Oh my goodness, so much today. We can talk about it a little bit more today, or more tomorrow, but I saw that Pam had commented that it was hard to know whether to be upset or horrified or pleased about the resolution of the de Villefort strand of the story, because Monsieur de Villefort clearly deserved to be smote down by fate or the hand of, the Count of Monte Cristo, however you want to look at it. But at the same time, the suicide of the killing of his wife and the killing of their child, it was more even than the Count of Monte Cristo had wanted nor foreseen, and it was devastating. Even though he deserved retribution, I mean, the punishment of losing his family that way and then him going mad was just very, very traumatic. Also, I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on the thing too about Mercédès, the money that was waiting for her at the house, and the saying that the Count had, with delicacy, said that the story of it hadn't been placed there before. So now I'm doubting whether or not it actually was a dowry he had brought back for Mercédès, or whether it was an amount that he thought was reasonable, which he had buried there recently for her to be waiting should she come. So, if anyone has thoughts on that, I'd love to see what your thoughts on it are, whether or not it was indeed a dowry that young Edmond Dantès the sailor had buried there for his bride, or whether it was something that the Count of Monte Cristo had done as an act of mercy for his former betrothed. Sorry. This is just such an emotional reading. We've got only 2 more days. I'll see you guys tomorrow. And again, if you haven't yet RSVP'd for the event, please go ahead and do that, and then write to us also so that we can send you the passcode. All right. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. We have just 2 more days of our read aloud together. I can't believe how close we are to the end. Oh, and yet it's like, it's just so emotional, these chapters. Oh my goodness. Okay. Thank you for taking this journey with me. I'll see you guys later. Bye.